By noon, the highway had become a ribbon of white fire. Heat rose in wavering curtains, turning the horizon into a mirage that kept stepping backward as if it were shy. The asphalt hummed beneath my tires, a steady drone that made the steering wheel vibrate gently against my palms. I kept the air on low to save gas, but warm air still crawled around my ankles, lifting the dust that had settled on the floor mats and into the folds of my jeans. The radio made a lyre of every station. Static, a burst of weather, a preacher promising salvation, 3 notes of a country song, and then nothing but snow. I let it cycle while my mind did its own scanning. The last words we said to each other. The shape of an apartment key handed back across a counter. The hollow space on my ring finger that felt like a sunburn. I had slept 2 hours and then left before dawn. The city's lights fading in the rearview like a dream I wasn't ready to admit I'd had. Out here, there was only the road, the desert, and the sky, stacked in long horizontal bands as if painted by someone who liked simple answers. Sage and scrub rushed past in low green blurs. Far off, pale mountains leaned against a washed-out sky. A crow hopped along a fence post and watched me go. The world was so big it made me feel small in a way that wasn't painful, not exactly, but tender, like pressing a bruise to see if it still hurts. I caught my reflection in the side mirror and almost didn't know the man looking back. Stubble I hadn't bothered to shave. Sunglasses hiding tired eyes. Jaw set in that stubborn line I'd used all week, convincing myself that leaving was the same as moving on. The truth was simpler and messier. I was running. I didn't know toward what, only away from what I'd become when love turned heavy and ordinary and then tired of carrying me. A gust swept across the road, rolling a small tumbleweed along the shoulder until it collapsed into itself like a deflated lung. Dust lifted in a thin veil and drifted through a crack in the window seal, tasting faintly of chalk and old pennies. I coughed and turned the vents away from my face. The temperature gauge hovered just right of center. The gas needle kissed a line that meant I should think about the next town. My phone showed a bar of service and then none, as unreliable as the radio. All afternoon the desert felt empty, a place with the volume turned down. That was why I noticed him. A figure ahead on the shoulder, small at first, a vertical mark between the gray of road and the blonde of scrub. I slowed without meaning to. The mirage let him sharpen. Broad shoulders in a faded denim shirt, worn jeans dusty to the knee, boots planted as if the ground needed anchoring. A hat brim cut a clean line against the sky. He wasn't hitchhiking in the usual way. No thumb stuck out, no cardboard sign. He stood with one hand raised, palm out, steady as a metronome. My first thought was practical. People break down out here. People die out here if no one stops. My second thought was fear wearing the clothes of caution. Don't stop for strangers on empty roads. Don't put your life in the hands of a story you're telling yourself about kindness and fate. The car kept rolling, a slow glide while I tried on every reason to keep going. As I drew close enough to see his face, something snagged. He had that sun-browned look of someone who worked outdoors and a quietness that showed in the way he stood. Weight even, not leaning, not desperate. His eyes found mine through the windshield. Not demanding, not pleading, just clear. The kind of look you give a skittish animal so it knows you won't spook. The radio chose that moment to lurch back to life with a chorus about empty highways and the way trouble finds you even when you don't stop. I flicked it off. The silence landed with weight. I could hear the rattle in the dashboard, the tiny chirp of something metallic in the glove compartment with every bump, the thin hiss of air from a vent that should have been replaced a year ago. I eased my foot over the gas as if more speed would make the decision for me. The desert rolled on, indifferent. The man lifted his hand a little higher. Not a wave exactly. More like a signal that said I see you. That said I'm here. My mind went to headlines, to cautionary tales, to the ways grief can make you careless. Then it went to the night I stood in the kitchen, the rough edge of the counter under my fingertips, the sound of someone I loved saying they were done trying to make it work. The way my mouth opened and nothing useful came out. The useless, helpless feeling of watching something you built blow away like dust. I checked the rear view. No cars. The road behind me stretched straight as a measured breath, empty to the vanishing point. The road ahead did the same. The desert was a witness with 1,000 small eyes, all of them looking without judgment. I passed him just barely. It would have been easy to keep going. My chest tightened as if a belt had been cinched a notch. In the mirror, he turned his head to follow my car, hands still raised. There was no drama to it, no shouting, no performance. He waited, as if he were used to doing that. As if he knew sometimes you have to give people time to be brave. I heard my voice in my head, the old habits. You don't owe anyone. You don't know him. You aren't a rescue line. Then a quieter voice that sounded like the man I used to be before I learned the cost of carrying no one but myself. What if this is the moment you wish you had back? What if the story you tell tonight rests on whether you touched the brake? Should I stop? It feels risky, but something in his eyes makes me pull over. I said it out loud without meaning to, and the sound of my own voice startled me. The words hung there, plain and honest and hard to take back. I tapped the brake and felt the car's weight shift. Gravel chattered under my tires as I drifted toward the shoulder. Heat pressed in through the windshield, sudden and close. The engine ticked its complaint when I downshifted and let the speed drop. I passed a mesquite stump and saw it throw a dark, hard shadow that made the light look even brighter around it. The sky was that endless western blue that promises nothing and therefore keeps every promise. My heart beat a little too fast. My hands felt slick on the wheel, and I wiped one on my jeans, leaving a crease through the dust. I stopped 20 yards ahead of him, not right beside him like an invitation I couldn't take back, not so far that it looked like I wanted to pretend I hadn't seen. I put the car in park but kept the engine running, a small, steady animal purring under the hood. The air between us shook with heat. For a moment I didn't move. My breath came slow and deliberate, the way you breathe before you open a door you aren't sure you want to walk through. I looked at my hands again. They were trembling just enough to make the keys chime against each other on the lanyard. The instinct to lock the doors arrived like a reflex. I pressed the button anyway, hearing the soft clunk of the mechanisms settling into place, then thumbed it again so they popped free. Negotiations with myself, cautious and hopeful in the same breath. In the side mirror I watched him approach, the economy of his stride, the way the hat brim cut the flare of light and threw a narrow band of shade across his eyes. Dust rose around his boots and hung there as if unwilling to fall back to earth. I rolled the window down halfway. The hot air hit like a wall, full of sun-baked creosote and something metallic, the scent of the road itself. He stopped a respectful distance from the door and tipped the brim with 2 fingers. I could see him more clearly now. A day's edge of beard. Lines at the corner of his mouth that came from squinting into weather, not from frowning. His shirt was the washed-out blue of a sky right before dawn. "Afternoon," he said, voice low and even, the kind that made the word feel heavier than it was. "Sorry to bother you." Something in my chest eased a notch, not because the risk had changed, but because he met me right where I was, halfway between leaving and arriving. The desert hummed, crickets or heat or electricity in the lines. The radio stayed quiet. The road ahead waited, straight as a dare. I nodded, swallowing against a throat suddenly dry. "You okay?" He glanced back down the highway, then toward the horizon where the mountains sat like tired giants. When his eyes returned to mine, they held the same quiet I'd seen from a distance, steady and unhurried, as if he trusted the ground under us more than the moment we were in. "Truck gave up a mile back," he said. "Been out here a bit. I was hoping to catch a ride as far as town." I looked forward at the road, then back at him, then down at my hands. The scar at the base of my thumb caught the sun and flashed. The air smelled like hot metal and dry grass. Somewhere a raven called, a rough sound that pulled at memory. My life was a car in park on the side of a desert highway, engine running, doors unlocked. I could press the gas and leave the moment behind, let it shrink in the mirror until it became something easy to explain. Or I could do the smaller, braver thing and make room. I reached across and pushed open the passenger door. The hinge creaked, honest and a little surprised. "Hop in," I said. "Let's get you to town." The passenger door creaked wider as he caught the edge with one calloused hand and leaned down. For a moment, The brim of his hat shadowed his face so I couldn't read him. Then he ducked inside, moving carefully like he didn't want to disturb the air. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Leather, sun, and dust, all baked together by miles of heat. The second was the way he filled the seat without trying to. He wasn't huge, not in the way of movie cowboys, but he carried himself as if his shoulders had grown used to work and weather. His skin was browned, not the smooth tan of leisure but the kind carved by long days outdoors. His boots were scuffed to a dull gray, desert dust clinging stubbornly in every crease. He shut the door gently, almost apologetic. "Appreciate it," he said, low and steady, tipping his hat back so his eyes found me. They were pale, maybe blue, maybe gray, hard to tell in the shifting light, but clear in a way that made me glance away quicker than I meant to. I nodded, still gripping the wheel like I needed proof it was solid. "No problem. You said your truck's back a mile." "Yeah, old Ford. Been sputtering all week. She finally gave out yesterday evening. I thought I could fix it myself." He rubbed the back of his neck, where a line of sunburn reddened the skin under his hairline. "Turns out I couldn't." I tried to picture him standing out there all night while the stars wheeled over this endless desert. The idea made my chest tighten. "You've been out here since then?" "Mostly." He shrugged like it was nothing. "Figured someone would come by sooner or later." The highway had been empty for hours. Sooner or later out here could have meant a lot worse. I stole another glance at him. His hands rested loose on his knees, big-knuckled and rough but not restless. He wasn't fidgeting, wasn't crowding me, just sitting like a man who knew how to be still. Yet that steady calm almost unsettled me more than if he'd been nervous. Can I trust him? The thought crept up, uninvited but familiar. My chest carried its own warning sirens, learned from news reports, from stories whispered over beers, from the voice of my ex telling me I was too quick to believe in people. Cleared my throat. "You could have, I don't know, called a tow." He shook his head. "Service out here's spotty. Besides, not much point. Closest shop's in Dry Creek, and they'll charge more to haul it than to fix it. Figured I'd just find a way into town and sort it from there." "Dry Creek," I repeated. "Little place about 20 miles up." He gave a small smile, as if he knew how unimpressive that sounded. "Got one diner, one mechanic, and about 3 streets that matter." I let out a small breath, half laugh, half disbelief. "Sounds lively." He chuckled, and the sound surprised me. It was low, genuine, and it smoothed some of the edge off my nerves. "Don't let it fool you. We do all right." The road hummed under the tires. I realized I'd slowed to a crawl, the decision still hanging unspoken in the air. Part of me wanted to drop him back at his truck with a wave and keep driving, free of whatever this was. Another part, the quieter, stubborn part, was already adjusting to the weight of him beside me, already cataloging the way his presence steadied the cabin, like a stone in my pocket. He seemed to sense the hesitation because he leaned slightly toward the dash, keeping his body angled away so he wasn't crowding me. "If it's trouble, I can walk," he said, voice plain. "I've done longer stretches." I shook my head before I even thought it through. "No, it's fine." My voice sounded firmer than I felt. "I'll take you to Dry Creek." His eyes met mine again, steady and direct. There was no triumphant relief in them, just simple gratitude. "Thank you." Silence stretched between us, broken only by the rhythm of tires over sun-cracked road. I felt the heat rise on my neck and turned the vents higher, even though the air they blew was lukewarm at best. "Name's Colton," he said finally, as though remembering his manners. He offered his hand across the console. I hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm but not crushing, his palm rough with calluses that spoke of rope and leather reins, not keyboards or desk work. I gave my name, hearing how small it sounded against the sweep of the desert. "Well, name," Colton said, leaning back with a faint smile. "I owe you one." "You don't owe me anything," I said quickly, and meant it. The words felt like a reflex, the kind you give when you're not used to being needed. We drove on. He asked where I was headed, and I shrugged. "Anywhere but back." came out sharper than I intended. He didn't press. He just nodded, as if he understood the language of leaving. For a moment I almost wished he would ask, just so I could try the words on someone who wouldn't know the weight they carried. Instead, he studied the horizon, hat pushed back, eyes scanning the desert like he could read a story in its endless line. "Road'll take you where you let it," he said. Not advice, not comfort, just fact. I gripped the wheel tighter. Part of me wanted to scoff at the cowboy wisdom, but another part, a part one hadn't fed in months, held onto it like water. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was cautious, like we were two men circling the edges of something bigger, waiting to see if the ground between us was safe to stand on. When we passed the mile marker that meant his truck was behind us for good, I felt a strange tug. Relief, yes, but also the sharp awareness that I just stepped into a story I hadn't planned on telling. I glanced at him again. Sunlight pooled across his jawline, catching on the rough stubble there. His boots were planted firmly on the floorboard, as though he meant to keep the car steady by sheer presence. And his eyes, when they slid to mine briefly before returning to the horizon, carried a politeness that was more than manners. It was patience. For the first time all day I felt less alone. The road unspooled in front of us like a ribbon someone kept pulling. 20 miles to Dry Creek stretched into an eternity under the sun, the kind of distance that doesn't just measure in miles but in how much you're willing to sit with silence. At first, we didn't speak. The engine hummed a steady monotone. Wind clawed against the sides of the car, dragging fine dust through the window seemed so it hung faintly in the air, catching the light like floating ash. I fixed my eyes on the yellow line dividing the lanes, counting each dashed segment like a mantra. Colton sat with one elbow propped on the window ledge, hand curled near his chin. His hat shadowed most of his face, but I caught glimpses of his jaw, strong and still. He wasn't restless, wasn't drumming fingers or shifting in his seat. He just was. I didn't know if that steadiness made me more comfortable or more nervous. Minutes stretched until I realized I was gripping the wheel too tight. I let one hand drop to my lap, flexing the stiffness out of my fingers. The car's interior smelled faintly of him now. Dust, leather, and a warmth I couldn't name. Finally, he broke the silence. "You're kind stopping like that. Not many would." I glanced at him, then back to the road. "Guess I don't think about it that way. You looked like you needed help." "That I did." He gave a small laugh, quiet, almost self-deprecating. "First rule of ranch work. Don't let the equipment die on you. Second rule, carry water." Broke the first, kept the second. Spent most of last night counting stars. "Sounds lonely," I said before I could stop myself. He turned his head, studied me with those clear, steady eyes. "Not always. Stars keep better company than some folks." That silenced me again, though it wasn't the heavy, uneasy kind. More like he'd offered me a truth and was willing to let me decide whether to take it. After a mile or two, I asked, "You live around here?" "Couple hours north. Family ranch. Cattle mostly. Land's been in the family near 100 years. My dad passed last spring, so I took over." I risked another look at him. He spoke plain, without drama, but there was a shadow in the way he said it. Loss worn quiet, not loud. "That sounds like a lot to carry. Some days heavier than others," he admitted. His gaze returned to the horizon, scanning it like the desert might shift while we weren't watching. "Got a brother in town, but he's more into the hardware store than the land. So it's me now, day in, day out." I nodded, though the ache in his voice lingered in my chest. That steady way he sat, it wasn't just calm. It was a man holding weight without complaint. The silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It hummed, stretched, almost companionable. I don't know why I spoke next. Maybe the desert loosened something, or maybe his honesty nudged mine forward. "I left someone," I said quietly, eyes fixed hard on the road. His head turned slightly, just enough to show he was listening. "Back east," I continued. "It was messy. We'd been together for years. Thought we'd last longer than we did. Turns out, when someone stops looking at you the same way, there's not much holding you together." My throat tightened, but the words kept coming. pulled by the momentum of being finally spoken aloud. So I packed up and drove. Figured the farther I got, the easier it'd be to breathe. Colton didn't interrupt. He didn't offer pity or cliches. He just let me say it. And when I trailed off, he nodded, slow and sure. "Heartbreak's a stubborn thing," he said. "Follows you no matter how many miles you put between." The truth of it settled over me like the desert heat. Heavy, but strangely cleansing. I exhaled through a shaky laugh. "You don't say much, but when you do, you cut right to it." He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth twitching upward before fading again. "Don't see much point in dressing words up. Life's plain enough. For a few miles, that was all." Then, softer, he added, "I know what it's like, though, to lose someone. Maybe not the same way, but close enough." I didn't ask for details. His tone made clear it wasn't something to pry at. Still, that admission bridged something between us, like two travelers trading scars without showing the wound. The road stretched endlessly, but it felt shorter somehow with him there. Each mile folded into the next, measured in glances more than in signs. I caught him watching me once, just for a heartbeat, before his gaze returned to the horizon. It wasn't predatory or probing, just curious, maybe thoughtful. But it sent a current through me all the same. I realized then that the silence between us had changed. At the start, it was a wall. Now it felt more like a blanket, thin, frayed, but warm. Something we both sat under, not apart from. I shifted in my seat, stealing a glance of my own. The line of his jaw was strong, a little rough with stubble. His hands rested steady on his thighs, fingers splayed wide like he trusted the ground even inside the moving car. His presence filled the small cabin not with noise, but with something I hadn't expected: ease. "Funny," I said, almost to myself. "What is?" His eyes flicked to me, then back to the road. "How someone you just met can feel less like a stranger than people you've known for years." He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt deliberate, like he was weighing his words. Finally, he said, "Sometimes the road strips things down, makes it easier to see what's real." I let out a slow breath, my chest loosening in a way it hadn't since I left home. We drove on, two men in the middle of nowhere, carrying different weights but walking the same invisible line. Every stolen glance, every unspoken pause was a thread weaving something fragile between us. Something that could break with one wrong word. But for now, it held. And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't make me feel alone. The first sign of trouble came as a smear across the horizon. A strange dark line cutting against the pale sweep of sky. At first I thought it was just a bank of clouds, a relief from the sun. But the line thickened, rose higher, swallowing the horizon in a bruised gray. Colton noticed it too. He leaned forward, adjusting the brim of his hat. "That's not shade," he muttered. "That's a storm." I glanced sideways. "Sandstorm?" He nodded once, jaw set. "And it's moving fast." The air seemed to change all at once. Still, then suddenly restless, tugging at the edges of the world. The light dimmed, not gently but sharply, as if someone had pulled a veil across the sun. My stomach tightened. Out here, miles from anywhere, the road felt suddenly fragile. A thin thread stretched across something bigger and angrier than us. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice tighter than I meant. Colton's eyes flicked across the empty desert, scanning with a kind of practiced calm. "There used to be an old shack up ahead, maybe a mile or two. If it's still standing, that's our best bet." I pressed the accelerator, the car humming harder beneath my hands. The wind picked up, slapping grit against the windshield in tiny sharp clicks. My fingers clenched tighter on the wheel. Each mile felt longer than the last, the sky thickening into a copper haze. "There," Colton said suddenly, pointing. I squinted through the swirl of dust. At first I saw nothing, then a dark square emerged against the tan. A structure, crooked, weather-beaten, but upright. Relief flushed through me. We pulled off the road, tires crunching through gravel and scrub. The shack was little more than four walls and a roof leaning against time. One door, half-hinged, swung loose in the growing wind. We ran for it, heads ducked against the blast of grit. The wind tore at my shirt, filling my ears with a roar like ocean surf. By the time we shoved inside, my eyes burned, and my mouth tasted like ash. The shack smelled of old wood, dust, and something faintly metallic. Light leaked in through cracks in the boards. Thin golden beams caught in the swirling grit we dragged inside. The wind rattled the walls but held them, for now. Colton shut the door as best he could, then dropped the latch. A bent nail hooked through a splintered plank. He turned to me, brushing dust off his shirt. His hat was powdered in grit, his hair damp with sweat beneath it. Yet his eyes were steady, calm in the storm. "You all right?" he asked. I laughed shakily. Define all right. That earned a small smile, quick but real. He nodded toward a corner where the floor was mostly clean of debris. "Sit. Storm'll take a while." I sank down, back against the wall. The boards pressed rough against my shoulders, but it felt good to stop moving, to breathe air without it being stolen by the wind. Colton sat a foot or two away, stretching his legs out. His boots made dull thuds on the wooden floor. The temperature dropped with the sun, the desert chill moving in quick and sharp. I rubbed my arms through my thin shirt, suddenly aware of how unprepared I was. Colton noticed. He reached into a worn canvas pack slung over his shoulder, one I hadn't noticed in the chaos, and pulled out a folded wool blanket. "Here," he said, offering it without ceremony. I hesitated. "What about you?" "I've got another." He tugged a second one from the bag, thinner, patched in places. The wool smelled faintly of smoke and sage, a scent so rooted in earth it grounded me. I wrapped it around my shoulders, sighing at the sudden warmth. "Thanks." He nodded and leaned back against the wall, pulling his own blanket across his lap. For a while we sat listening to the storm batter the shack. Dust sifted through the cracks, whispering across the floor. I dug a water bottle from the console bag I'd grabbed on the way in. "Want some?" He accepted it with a quiet, "Much obliged." Unscrewing the cap, he drank slow, careful sips, then handed it back. My fingers brushed his as I took it, a brief, warm contact that lingered in my skin even after I pulled away. The silence between us grew heavier, but not uncomfortable. The storm outside roared, but inside there was only the steady rhythm of breath, the occasional creak of shifting wood. Eventually, Colton spoke, his voice softer now, shaped by the closeness of the space. "You ever notice how storms remind you how small you are?" I gave a short laugh. "Pretty hard to ignore right now." He turned his head, studying me. "Sometimes small's not so bad. Makes you pay attention to what's close." The words hung in the air. I felt them more than I understood them. My eyes traced the rough line of his jaw, the way his blanket slipped at the shoulder, revealing sun-dark skin beneath. Heat flared in me, surprising, unwelcome, yet impossible to deny. I shifted, pulling my own blanket tighter. My shoulder brushed his in the process, light but unmistakable. He didn't move away. We sat like that, shoulders touching through layers of fabric, the contact tentative but steady. My chest ached with nerves. Too close, too soon. "What are you doing?" And yet, beneath the fear, something softer stirred. Comfort, belonging, the quiet shock of not wanting to pull back. I turned my head slightly. His profile was calm, gaze fixed on the cracks of light in the boards, but I could see the faint rise of his chest, steady, grounding. I wondered if he felt it too, the pull, the risk, the fragile thread between us. I swallowed hard, looking away, forcing a laugh that sounded too thin. "Guess this isn't how either of us planned to spend the night." "No," he agreed, a smile curling at the edge of his mouth. "But it's not the worst place to be." The storm roared on, but inside the shack, wrapped in blankets and dust, I felt something shift. Fear still lived in me, yes, fear of being seen, of being vulnerable, of letting the wrong person too close. But alongside it, sparking quietly in the shadows, was something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The storm wore on into night, relentless as a tide. The shack creaked beneath each gust, dust rattling through the cracks like dry rain. The last of the daylight bled from the sky, leaving us wrapped in a heavy dark that felt almost alive. Colton rummaged in his pack and pulled out a battered lantern, the kind you crank by hand. He wound it a few times, and a soft amber glow bloomed, pushing back the dark in shaky circles. The light painted his face in warm tones, bronzed skin, lines of wear, stubble catching the glow. It was enough to make the world beyond feel far away, like nothing existed but the storm and the two of us. We sat cross-legged on the splintered floor, blankets pulled tight, sharing the lantern's small pool of light. The silence between us was no longer heavy, no longer tentative. Felt like a question waiting to be answered. Colton was the first to speak. His voice was low, the words carrying the weight of someone unused to saying them aloud. Truth is, I ain't said this to anyone before. I shifted, looking at him fully. His hat sat on the floor now, tossed aside, leaving his hair flattened and damp at the edges. He stared at his hands, fingers rough, turning the lantern's reflection over his knuckles like he could hide behind it. What is it? I asked gently. He inhaled slowly, then let it out through his nose. I've spent my whole life out on that ranch. Folks out there, they got a way of thinking clear lines, what's right, what ain't. You follow 'em or you're trouble. And me. His mouth twitched, as though the words threatened to choke him. Me. I never fit them lines clean. The lantern light flickered against his jaw as he tilted his head down. I've looked at men, thought about 'em in ways I never dared speak. Out there, though, if people knew, it'd be the end of me. The ranch, the family name, everything. I didn't speak at first. The rawness in his words demanded respect, not interruption. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. Guess what I'm saying is, I ain't never told anyone. Not once. But sittin' here with you. He hesitated, glanced at me, then away again. Feels different. My chest tightened. I knew that feeling all too well, the silence, the hiding, the fear of being found out in the wrong place, the wrong time. I reached up, tugging the blanket closer around my shoulders, as if it might hold me steady. You're not alone in that, I said softly. His eyes found mine, sharp and searching. No. I shook my head. I grew up with those lines too. Maybe not on a ranch, but in a town just like it. People smile at you on Sundays, but God help you if you step outside the script. I tried to follow it. I really did. I had someone years together, thought it was enough to prove I was worth something. But when it fell apart, it was like I lost the only place I could exist. The words tumbled out faster now, sharper, pulled by a current I'd been resisting for months. He left, and I couldn't breathe in that town anymore. Not with the whispers, the pity, the sense that everyone was watching me come apart. So I packed up and drove. Kept telling myself I was chasing freedom, but really, I was running until I couldn't see my own life in the rearview. My throat burned. I hadn't meant to spill it all, hadn't planned on letting a stranger see the softest parts of me. But Colton didn't flinch. He didn't fill the silence with empty reassurances. He just sat there, lantern glow catching in his steady eyes, letting me be heard. Finally, he spoke. Sounds like you've been carrying a load alone. I let out a bitter laugh. Feels lighter saying it out loud, even if it's to a man I barely know. Sometimes strangers are the only ones who'll listen honest, he said. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. The storm howled outside, but in here, the air was thick with something else. Something fragile, dangerous, alive. Colton shook his head quickly, as though sparing me from finishing. I know. His voice was rougher now, raw. He rubbed his free hand over his jaw, staring at the lantern. I ain't sure what I just did. I just couldn't help it. I sat frozen, torn clean in two. Fear gnawed at me. The old fear, the one that whispered of danger, of rejection, of mistakes that can't be undone. But beneath it was something undeniable. The warmth of his hand, the memory of that kiss, the stunning relief of being seen without pretense. I don't know what this means, I whispered. Me neither, he said, looking at me again. His eyes were raw, vulnerable in a way that broke me open. But I ain't sorry. I tightened my grip on his hand. My pulse still raced, but I didn't pull away. The storm raged outside, but in that small circle of lantern light, I felt something steadier than fear. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't running. And that terrified me more than anything. The storm eased sometime before dawn. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking to silence. Thick and surprising, after hours of wind and dust battering the walls. A pale band of light pressed through the cracks in the boards, soft and clean compared to last night's chaos. I shifted beneath the blanket, my body stiff from the uneven floor. Across from me, Colton stirred. His hat pulled low over his eyes as if it could guard him from morning itself. For a few seconds, I just watched him. His breathing was steady, chest rising and falling beneath the wool blanket. Stray beams of light painted golden edges on his stubble, the curve of his cheekbone. He looked less guarded in sleep, younger somehow. Then his eyes blinked open, clear and unflinching even after a night like ours. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The memory of his hand in mine, of the kiss, brief, hesitant, undeniable, hung between us like smoke. I cleared my throat, suddenly self-conscious. Storm's gone. Looks like it. His voice was rough with sleep, lower than usual. He sat up, pushing the hat back, rubbing at his eyes. Guess we made it through. Guess so. The silence that followed was different than last night. Not companionable, not heavy, but awkward, fragile. Two men unsure how much of the dark could survive in daylight. We packed up what little we had and stepped outside. The air smelled scrubbed clean, washed of dust and heat. The desert stretched wide under a pale blue sky, the kind of morning that almost looked innocent, as if it hadn't tried to kill us a few hours ago. Colton adjusted his hat, squinting at the horizon. Trucks still back a ways. Best to head for Dry Creek and come back later. I nodded, unlocking the car. Yeah, let's go. The drive started quiet. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, eyes fixed on the endless line of road. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him glance toward me once, then look away, as if searching for words that wouldn't come. I felt the weight of last night pressing at me. His confession, my own, the brush of lips in lantern light. I wanted to speak, to ask what it meant, but my throat stayed tight. Instead, I focused on the small things. The hum of the tires, the smell of sage carried through the vents, the play of sunlight across the dashboard. It was Colton who broke the silence first. Thanks for staying calm last night. I gave a short laugh. I didn't feel calm. Well, you looked it. Helped me more than I figured it would. He leaned back, tipping his hat slightly. You're steadier than you think. That surprised me. I wasn't sure I'd ever been called steady before. My instinct was to argue, but the sincerity in his tone stopped me. I let the words settle, warming me more than I expected. We drove on. Miles slipped beneath us. Slowly, awkwardness softened into something else. Something tentative but real. At one point, he reached forward to adjust the air vent, and his hand brushed mine where it rested on the console. The touch was light, fleeting, but it jolted through me all the same. I froze, waiting for him to pull back quickly, embarrassed. He didn't. His fingers lingered for just a second longer than necessary before moving away. My heart thudded, and when I glanced at him, his gaze was on the road, expression unreadable. Later, a hawk swooped low across the road, wings stretched wide. I muttered, "Guess even the birds are braver than me." Colton chuckled, a soft rumble in his chest. "Don't sell yourself short. That bird's just looking for breakfast. You stopped for a stranger on a lonely road." "Yeah, and look where that got me," I teased, trying to lighten the knot in my chest. His smile widened, the kind that reached his eyes for once. "Could have done worse." We laughed, and the sound felt good, too good. It filled the cabin, breaking tension I hadn't realized I was holding. For the first time since I'd left home, Laughter didn't feel like pretending. Felt earned. The desert rolled past. A landscape that had once seemed endless and empty but now felt like something else. Vast, yes, but alive, filled with quiet possibilities. I found myself sneaking glances at him. The way the brim of his hat cut a sharp line against the sky. The curve of his hand resting on his knee, fingers relaxed. The way his eyes softened when he looked out across the land, like he was part of it, not separate. And then the thought came, unbidden, startling in its clarity. Why does this stranger feel more like home than anywhere I've been? The question unsettled me. I tightened my grip on the wheel, trying to bury it, but it stayed, stubborn as the desert sun. Colton must have felt the shift, because he turned his head slightly. "You all right?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" I almost told him, almost confessed the thought that had gripped me so tightly. But instead, I shook my head, offering a small smile. "About how empty this road would have been without you." He studied me for a moment, his eyes sharp but not demanding. Then he nodded, as if he understood more than I said. We drove the rest of the way in a silence that no longer felt awkward. Felt like space, room to breathe, to wonder, to let something unnamed take root. When the first signs of Dry Creek appeared, an old gas station, a weathered billboard promising the best pie in the county, I felt an unexpected pang. Relief, yes, but also disappointment. The road, the silence, the small touches, they'd been ours, untouchable by the rest of the world. Colton pointed ahead. "That's the diner. Mechanic's shop is just past it." I nodded, slowing the car as we rolled into town. The buildings were sun-bleached, worn at the edges, but alive with the quiet hum of routine. Kids on bikes, a dog sleeping under the awning of a hardware store. As I pulled into the diner lot, I caught his reflection in the side window. For just a second, he looked at me, not at the town, not at the day ahead, but at me. The look was brief, almost shy, but it left me breathless. Whatever last night had meant, whatever today might bring, I knew one thing for certain. The road ahead felt different now. Not because it promised answers, but because, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't driving it alone. Dry Creek wasn't much more than a handful of streets stitched together by dust and sun. The diner sat at the edge of town, chrome dulled by years of heat, its neon sign buzzing faintly even in daylight. Across from it stood the mechanic's shop, a low squat building with a corrugated roof and a sign that simply read, Earl's Garage. We pulled into the dirt lot, gravel crunching under the tires. Colton tilted his hat forward as if preparing for the eyes that would inevitably fall on us. Out here, I realized, everyone probably knew everyone else's business, and a stranger was as noticeable as a storm on the horizon. I cut the engine, the sudden quiet ringing in my ears. For a moment, neither of us moved. The whole ride into town I'd tried to convince myself that once we reached Dry Creek, the line between us would fade. That what happened in the storm would stay in the storm. But when I turned my head, Colton was already looking at me. His eyes held that same steady patience that had disarmed me from the start. He cleared his throat, voice low. "You don't have to keep driving, you know?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" He gestured vaguely toward the town, toward the diner with its smudged windows and the quiet street beyond. "Got a spare room out at the ranch. It ain't much, but it's a roof, and maybe a little company." The offer hung between us, heavy and fragile all at once. My instinct was to pull back, keep running. That's what I did, put miles between myself and anything that hurt, anything that asked me to stay still long enough to feel. The thought of accepting, of planting even a temporary root, made my chest tighten with panic. But then I looked at him. The way he'd said it, not as a demand, not even as a plea, but as an invitation. Gentle, hesitant, honest, and I realized part of me ached at the thought of leaving. Ached in a way I hadn't expected. I laughed nervously, rubbing the back of my neck. "You don't even know me." His lips twitched into something almost like a smile. "Maybe not, but I know enough. I know you stopped when no one else would. I know you got hurt and you kept going anyway. That's more than most folks I see out here. I swallowed hard, words drying in my throat. What was I supposed to say to that? My voice cracked, and I looked away, out at the town. Kids on bikes rattled down the street. A dog dozed in the shade of a telephone pole. The simplicity of it felt almost foreign, like stepping into a photograph from another life. I don't know if I can stay. I don't even know who I am right now. Then stay till you figure it out, Colton said quietly. His gaze didn't waver. One night. That's all I'm a skin. After that, you can drive on if you want. I pressed my palms against the steering wheel, the leather warm under my hands. Inside, a storm churned louder than the one we'd survived last night. Fear and longing colliding hard. One side of me screamed to keep running, to stay safe in movement. The other whispered that maybe, just maybe, this dusty town and this steady-eyed cowboy were offering me something I hadn't dared hope for. A second chance. I closed my eyes. If I stay, what does that mean? If I leave, what will I regret more? The silence stretched until I couldn't bear it. Finally, I let out a breath that shook more than I wanted him to hear. All right, I said. One night. Relief flickered across his face, subtle but unmistakable. He nodded once, slow, like he understood the weight of what I'd agreed to. One night, he echoed. We climbed out of the car. The heat was softer now. The worst of the storm's edge cooled into a tolerable warmth. Colton tipped his hat at a passerby who called his name. A small-town greeting that confirmed what I already suspected. Everyone here knew him. As we crossed toward the diner, I felt eyes on me. Curious, assessing, but not hostile. Just the gaze small towns give strangers, measuring where you might fit in their world. Inside, the diner smelled of bacon grease and strong coffee. A waitress with a pencil behind her ear gave Colton a familiar smile. Storm didn't take you out, huh? Not this time, he said, sliding into a booth. He motioned for me to sit across from him. Menus weren't necessary. He ordered for both of us without asking, as though he'd done it 100 times. I should have bristled at the assumption, but instead I found it grounding, like he'd made room for me in a place that was his. When the food came, pancakes stacked high, coffee poured hot, I realized how hungry I was. We ate in a silence that wasn't awkward anymore, but steady, familiar, as if the act of sharing a table meant something neither of us wanted to say out loud. After, we walked back out to the car. The town moved slow around us, people nodding greetings, cars rolling lazily down sun-bleached streets. I tried to picture myself here, not as a visitor passing through, but as someone who belonged. The thought scared me with its tenderness. Back in the car, I turned to him. So, where to? He smiled faintly, eyes narrowing against the sun. Ranch is about 20 minutes north. If you're still good with staying. I hesitated only a moment before nodding. Yeah, I'm good with it. As we pulled out of Dry Creek, a strange calm settled over me. The road still stretched on, promising escape if I wanted it. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel the urge to outrun myself. I glanced at Colton, his profile lit by afternoon sun, jaw set with quiet strength. And I thought of the words he'd said in the shack. Sometimes the road strips things down, makes it easier to see what's real. Maybe he was right. Maybe what was real wasn't the running, but the stopping. Maybe, just for now, home wasn't a place I had to search for across endless highways. Maybe it was sitting right beside me, steady as the desert sky. I told myself it would only be one night, just one, enough to catch my breath before moving on. But one night bled into two, and then a week, and before I knew it, the idea of leaving felt less like freedom and more like tearing something from my chest. Colton's ranch wasn't much to look at by city standards. Weather-beaten fences, a barn that leaned with the years, a house that smelled faintly of cedar and dust. But it breathed in a way that no apartment or rented room ever had. The land stretched wide and endless, rolling with dry grass and scattered cattle. The horizon painted every evening with sunsets that seemed almost too dramatic to be real. Out here, the world slowed enough for me to feel each breath, each heartbeat, each quiet moment that stitched itself into a life. The days were long. I wasn't used to ranch work. My hands blistered the first morning I tried to mend a fence with him, the rope burning grooves into my palms. Colton just handed me gloves and smiled in that steady way of his. "Takes time," he said. "You'll learn." And I did. Slowly. The ache in my muscles became familiar, even welcome. There was satisfaction in the sweat, in the grit under my nails, in looking out over a pasture and knowing I'd helped keep it standing. We'd work in silence sometimes, the kind that wasn't empty but full, punctuated by the lowing of cattle, the whistle of wind through dry grass. Other times, he'd tell me small stories, about his father teaching him to ride, about winters when the snow came down so heavy they had to dig paths to the barn, about nights spent under the stars when the world felt too big to contain. In return, I found myself talking in ways I hadn't for years. I told him about the city, about the hollow hum of traffic, about the relationship I'd left behind and the way it had broken me open. He listened without judgment, never interrupting, never trying to patch over the ache with false comfort. Just hearing him say, "I get it," was enough. Evenings became my favorite. After long days of work, we'd sit on the porch with cold beers, watching the sky melt from gold to indigo. Sometimes we'd laugh about small things, the way a calf got itself tangled in a fence, or how I tripped over my own boots trying to be useful. Other times, we sat in silence, shoulders brushing, a warmth growing between us that felt unspoken but undeniable. The moments of closeness grew naturally. His hand would brush mine when passing tools. Our knees would knock together on the porch steps, neither of us pulling away. Once, while we repaired a section of fence, he steadied me by the waist when I slipped, his touch firm and lingering just long enough for my heart to stumble in my chest. It was different than the kiss in the shack, that had been hesitant, born of storm and darkness and confessions heavy with fear. This was slower, steadier. Two men circling something fragile, building trust one shared silence at a time. I realized, one evening as we watched the sun dip below the horizon, that I was no longer counting the days until I left. I wasn't planning routes or calculating how much gas I'd need. I was just here, and it felt more like living than anything I'd done in months. Still, the unspoken hung between us. What we were, what we weren't. I carried the weight of it quietly, until one night Colton broke the silence. We'd finished dinner, dishes clattering in the sink, and stepped outside. The sky was wide and heavy with stars, brighter than I'd ever seen, stretching from horizon to horizon like a sea of fireflies. We stood there for a while, the desert night cool against our skin. Finally, he spoke, voice low but steady. "I've been thinking that." I turned toward him. His hat shadowed his eyes, but I could see the set of his jaw, the way he braced himself against his own words. "I ain't good with speeches," he continued, "but I need to say this plain. You came into my life out of nowhere. One minute I'm standing on the side of a highway, not sure if anyone would stop, and the next, you're here. And somehow, it feels like you've always been here." My chest tightened. The stars above seemed to tilt, pressing down. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. "I don't know what this is supposed to look like, or how it fits in a world that don't always take kindly to it. But I know this." His voice roughened, almost breaking. "I want you here, with me. Not for a night, not for a week. I want more than that." For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat was thick with everything I'd carried. Fear, shame, the instinct to run. But behind it all was the undeniable truth. I wanted him too. I swallowed hard, my voice trembling when I finally found it. "Colton, I've been running so long I forgot what it felt like to stop. But here, with you." I laughed shakily, pressing a hand to my chest. "For the first time, I don't feel lost. I feel found." He searched my face, as if needing to be sure. When he saw the truth there, his shoulders eased, the smallest smile tugging at his mouth. Then he leaned in, and this time, there was no hesitation. The kiss was certain, steady, filled with everything we hadn't said but had lived in every glance, every brush of hands, every laugh shared under the desert sky. His lips were warm, his hand coming up to cup my jaw, anchoring me as though he feared I might slip away. But I didn't. I kissed him back with everything I had, with every mile I'd traveled, with every ache I'd carried. When we finally broke apart, the stars seemed brighter, the night sharper, the world clearer than it had been in years. I rested my forehead against his, breath mingling in the cool air. I thought I was lost in the desert. I whispered, my voice breaking with the weight of it. But the truth is, I'd been found. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.